The desert sun hung low, casting a blood-orange glow over the barren expanse of Camp Bastion, Afghanistan, in 2018. Marine Sergeant Daniel Ruiz knelt beside a Humvee, his hands trembling as he clutched a small, tarnished medal engraved with the name Jacob Miller. The weight of it felt heavier than the rifle slung across his back. Around him, the base buzzed with the chaos of war, distant explosions, the hum of drones, and the shouts of soldiers preparing for a patrol. But Daniel's world was silent, his mind replaying the moment 2 weeks ago when Jacob, his best friend, had thrown himself on a grenade to save their squad. The medal was Jacob's, awarded posthumously, and Daniel had carried it ever since, a tether to a promise he'd made. Today, that promise would lead him to a moment no one could have predicted, a moment that would change lives, including his own. Daniel was no stranger to loss. At 32, he'd seen too many friends fall in the dust of foreign lands. Raised in a small Ohio town, he'd grown up on stories of heroes, his grandfather's tales of World War II, his mother's quiet pride in her son's service. But Jacob was different. He wasn't just a brother in arms, he was the guy who'd shared bad coffee and worse jokes, who'd written letters to Daniel's little sister when she was struggling in school, who'd promised to stand at Daniel's wedding someday. Jacob's selflessness wasn't loud or showy, it was in the way he'd give up his last Marie to a hungry private or stay up all night listening to a homesick recruit. That grenade had taken more than Jacob's life, it had taken the part of Daniel that still believed in hope. Now, Daniel faced a new kind of challenge. Word had spread through the base like wildfire, the president was coming. A surprise visit, they said, to boost morale. Daniel didn't care much for politics, red, blue, it all blurred together in the haze of war. But something about the visit stirred a restlessness in him. He'd heard the speeches, the promises of victory, the talk of heroes. Yet here he was, holding a medal for a hero who'd never come home, while the world moved on. The other Marines buzzed with excitement or cynicism, but Daniel felt only the weight of Jacob's name in his pocket. He didn't know what he'd do when the moment came, but he knew he had to do something. The president's arrival was a spectacle. Helicopters roared overhead, Secret Service agents swarmed, and a makeshift stage was erected in the mess hall. Daniel stood at the back, his uniform crisp but his heart heavy. The president, Donald Trump, stepped up, his voice booming with confidence, thanking the troops, praising their courage. Daniel's squad was called forward, singled out for their actions during the ambush that had taken Jacob. The president wanted to shake their hands, pin medals on their chests, and pose for photos. Daniel's comrades shuffled forward, some eager, some hesitant. But Daniel stayed rooted, his boots planted like they were stuck in the sand. Sergeant Ruiz, a voice barked. His commanding officer, Captain Hayes, shot him a look that could have melted steel. Get up there. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't want a handshake or a photo. He didn't want words that would ring hollow against the memory of Jacob's sacrifice. But the medal in his pocket burned, and Jacob's voice echoed in his mind, do something that matters, Danny. Don't just sit there. With a slow, deliberate step, Daniel moved toward the stage, his heart pounding louder than the applause. The president extended a hand, his smile wide, cameras flashing. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his face unreadable. The room grew quiet, the air thick with tension. Reporters leaned forward, sensing a story. Captain Hayes hissed under his breath, Ruiz, don't do this. But Daniel wasn't listening. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the medal, and held it up, the name Jacob Miller catching the light. This isn't mine, he said, his voice steady but raw. It belongs to a better man than me. His name was Jacob Miller. He saved us all. The president's smile faltered, his hand still outstretched. Daniel didn't take it. Instead, he placed the medal in the president's palm and turned away, walking back through the stunned crowd. Whispers erupted. Some called it disrespect, others, courage. Daniel didn't care. He'd kept his promise to Jacob, to make sure his name wasn't forgotten. But as he stepped outside into the cooling desert air, something shifted inside him. He'd expected to feel lighter, unburdened. Instead, he felt exposed, like he'd laid bare a piece of his soul. He didn't know that his act had already set something in motion, something far bigger than himself. Back in the States, the story spread. A grainy video of the moment, captured by a reporter's phone, went viral. Marine refuses to speak to Trump, hands him a hero's medal instead, the headline screamed. Some praised Daniel's quiet defiance, others vilified him. But the name Jacob Miller began to trend, and with it, stories of his kindness flooded social media. A teacher in Ohio shared how Jacob had tutored her son during leave. A nurse in Texas posted about the time Jacob had helped her fix a flat tire in the rain. Strangers began sending letters to Daniel's base, thanking him for reminding them what sacrifice meant. Daniel, still in Afghanistan, had no idea his act had sparked a movement. Months later, Daniel returned home to Ohio, a different man. The war had left scars, but the medal moment had left something else, a spark of purpose. He found his mailbox overflowing, not with bills, but with letters. One caught his eye, handwritten in neat cursive, from a woman named Sarah Miller, Jacob's mother. She asked to meet him. Daniel's stomach churned. He hadn't faced Jacob's family since the funeral, where he'd stood silent, unable to find words for their grief. But something in Sarah's letter, a quiet strength, a plea for connection, pulled him to her doorstep. Sarah's home was small, filled with photos of Jacob, grinning in his Little League uniform, laughing at a family barbecue, saluting in his marine dress blues. Sarah welcomed Daniel with a hug that felt like forgiveness. Over coffee, she told him how Jacob had always spoken of him, calling him, the brother I never had. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as Sarah handed him a worn journal, Jacob's. He wanted you to have this, she said. Inside were pages of Jacob's thoughts, his hopes, his belief in the good people could do if they chose to act. One entry read, Danny's got a heart bigger than he knows. Someday, he'll see it. Daniel broke down, the journal trembling in his hands. He'd spent months carrying Jacob's medal, thinking it was his duty to honor his friend's sacrifice. But now he saw it wasn't just about a moment on a stage, it was about living the way Jacob had, with kindness, with purpose. Sarah took his hand. You gave my son's name a voice, she said. Now let's give it a purpose. Together, they started the Jacob Miller Foundation, a small non-profit to support veterans and their families. Daniel poured himself into it, speaking at schools, organizing fundraisers, and helping soldiers find their way home, physically and emotionally. The foundation grew, fueled by the stories of Jacob's selflessness and Daniel's quiet act of courage. Communities rallied, strangers donated, and veterans found hope in programs that bore Jacob's name. Daniel, once lost in grief, found himself again, not as a hero, but as a man carrying forward a friend's legacy. One crisp autumn day in 2020, Daniel stood at a podium in his hometown, dedicating a community center named after Jacob. Hundreds gathered, veterans, families, even some of the reporters who'd been at Camp Bastion. Sarah stood beside him, her eyes shining with pride. Daniel looked out at the crowd, his voice steady but thick with emotion. This isn't about me, he said. It's about a man who believed in doing good, no matter the cost. Jacob Miller taught me that one act of courage, one moment of kindness, can change everything. Let's keep his name alive by living like he did. As the crowd applauded, Daniel felt Jacob's presence, not in a medal, but in the faces of those he'd helped, in the community he'd built. He'd refused to speak that day in Afghanistan, but his silence had spoken louder than words. It had sparked a chain of compassion, proving that even in a divided world, a single act of humanity could unite hearts across the globe. The sun set over the new community center, its sign gleaming, Jacob Miller House. Daniel touched the engraved name, a smile breaking through his scars. He'd kept his promise. And in doing so, he'd found his own. The world was a little brighter, a little kinder, because one Marine had chosen to honor a name with a medal, and a legacy with his life.